Okay. Hi, everyone who is watching this as a recording. Um, yeah, welcome to the INDEP online talk on why degrowth needs planning by Elena Hofferberth. And to give you a super short impression of who Elena is, Elena is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Lausanne. Her research focuses on the macro financial and political economy conditions for post-growth economy. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Leeds. And she's part of the International Post-Growth Economics Network, the Lausanne Ecological Economics Lab, and the Scientific Research Group on Sustainable Money. And Elena is keen to develop and discuss new economic approaches within and outside academia. She publishes in academic and non-academic articles, and links to these organizations will be put in the chat like super soon, and also a list of like her recent publications. And I think then the floor is yours, Elena. Let me know if screen share works.
Great. Yes, I'll try that out. Let me see. Should be this one. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Seems to work.
Beautiful. I mean, it's a PDF just because the PowerPoint just failed, but I hope it works. Great. So we said like 20 to 30 minutes. Maybe if I'm at 25 and haven't stopped talking, maybe you can give me a little sign, Eric. Otherwise,
Will do.
yeah, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Yeah, to listen to what I and my co-authors have to say about why degrowth needs planning, and why, yeah, also planning needs degrowth. Yeah, and so this is work that I have done with Cédric Durand and Matthias Schmerzer in different outlets. So yeah, links will be put yeah, in the notes with the chat or with the link to the recording. So yeah, we've been working together and we've come from different angles. And so now, yeah, and so I mean, our basic starting ground, and I think because like, I mean, in a way, like sometimes to me, it's evident that, oh, we think about planning because of the social-ecological crisis, but maybe that's not the entry point for everyone. But it has been for, yeah, Matthias, Cédric, and me. And so I would like to start just like doing a quick recap in terms of where we're at, in terms of, yeah, ecological and social, yeah, unfolding catastrophe, actually. And this graph is quite impressive because it shows us temperature, global warming over the last thousands of millions of years and 10,000s of years. And then on the right-hand side, it's just like in decades, and where you actually see like what we've, like temperature rises in the last few decades have like, yeah, can be compared to what has happened over millions of years before. And so these authors who did the study conclude that we're moving towards Earth system states that are far outside of individual, societal, and species experience. Another way, so this is temperature, climate change is all over the media. But then there is the concept of planetary boundaries, which actually captures different Earth system processes that are necessary for a stable system. And here the red line shows that in many of these dimensions, such as land system, biosphere, integrity, freshwater change, that we're actually already going beyond. And this is also important when we think about solving the ecological crisis. It's not only about carbon emissions, but really the complexity of the interaction of these different processes. Also, well, we don't only look at the ecological crisis as such, but how it's interlinked with yeah, social dimensions, and especially like global inequities and injustices. And so this is accumulated CO2 emissions in the past, and we see the big contributions of North America and Europe, which, when we compare it to actually what remains in terms of, yeah, achieving 1.5 or 2 degrees on the right-hand side, we kind of can capture where the main responsibility lies. This is the next graph captures more of the current dimensions in terms of, yeah, current emitters, where we see that the top 10% emit almost 45% of CO2, and in the top 1%, 70%, whereas the bottom 50% of global population actually contributes just above 10%. So we've got inequality in contribution here. And this is then the inequalities in terms of impact. So the top, I mean, I hope you can see it. The top kind of shows the contribution in terms of CO2 emissions. And then the bottom part show different types of effects on different regions, climate-related effects. And so, yeah, and where the darker colors show like higher risk of malaria, of deaths, of heat-related deaths, for example, and effects in terms of undernutrition. So it's also inequities in terms of the impact of climate breakdown. And yeah, as I might not have to tell many of you, it's really that in terms of the necessary changes, which, yeah, here with the plotted line, the green line on for 1.5 degrees, and where we're currently heading, we have a major emissions gap, so we're really not on track. Then from a degrowth angle, it's really the question of like, so what is driving these, in ecological crisis, but also these inequities. And here when we look at, the connection between global GDP, the global material footprint in dark violet, and the green dotted line in CO2 emissions, we have a strong coupling of economic growth and these environmental dimensions. And the green growth paradigm is actually saying, oh, we can decouple these different parameters, and therefore we can actually, continue to grow, but just do it greener. Hickel and Calles do a review study of the various assessments of these decoupling research, and come to the conclusion that first, there is no empirical evidence that absolute decoupling from resource use can be achieved on a global scale against a background of continued economic growth, and that absolute decoupling from carbon emissions is highly unlikely to be achieved at a rate rapid enough to prevent global warming over 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, even under optimistic policy conditions. So this is kind of, state of the art in terms of, how fast decoupling is actually happening. And then a more recent study by Vogel and Hickel then also takes into account an equity and justice component, just because we have now observed in a few countries absolute decoupling. But then the question is, in how far does this actually, how fast is it, and how comprehensive is it? Is it in line with actually just decoupling, fair shares decoupling? And they did define fair shares in terms of population size, so not even taking into account like historical emissions. And here, summarized in that graph, it's actually the blue dotted lines would be the 1.5 degree fair shares. And the red lines is the business as usual pathway for decoupling in these countries where decoupling has happened. And so we see that actually this again shows that even if there is some decoupling, it's by far not enough to comply with the fair 1.5 degree scenario. And so this is kind of the background for the degrowth and post-growth proposals, which for historical and current inequities targets countries in the global north and criticizes the hegemony of growth, the primacy of economic growth as a policy goal, but also, as I just said, the green growth paradigm as solution out of the crisis. It's important to say that it's not concerned with a reduction of GDP per se, but what matters is, people look at the potential effects of a radical enough social-ecological transformation on GDP, which might still create a reduction in GDP. And so Victor already more than 15 years ago said like it's really about being slower by design, not disaster. And Hickel frames the vision of the degrowth proposal, a planned reduction of energy and resource use to bring the economy back into balance with a living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. And so and there is different degrowth is a whole is a very diverse field. There's proposals for bottom-up initiatives, changes in lifestyles, but also policy proposals such as absolute resource caps, universal basic services, working time reduction, and so on. But what we see is actually that this planning element, while it's so very many of the definitions of degrowth have that element of it's coordinated, it's planned, it's designed, but there's very little explicit engagement with planning, even if it's implicit in many of these proposals. And so this is kind of the entry point where we said, okay, why has there been so little engagement with planning in the degrowth literature, and how could planning beyond growth actually look like? And I will spend less time on the critique of our fellow degrowth colleagues, because it's kind of like it's meant as a friendly, critical but friendly assessment in terms of really pushing also the field of degrowth to engage with this. And here, just well, to say briefly, we look at like 3 strands within post-growth economics: steady state economics, the new economics of prosperity, and then anthropological critiques of growth. And they have different theoretical and methodological backgrounds, but with different political implications. And just to say that steady state economics has 3 big goals. So it's really to put an absolute size on the economy, to redistribute, to have a fair distribution of income, but then have the market to do the efficient allocation. And here we, in that approach, we see that the role of private property, of the market as coordination mechanism is maintained because there is this assumption that the absolute limits and the fair distribution would solve certain would solve the problem of overshoot. But what we say is that actually it kind of neglects the capitalist drivers that underpin economic growth, and therefore and then also this approach really setting limits and boundaries, but not really going beyond, really looking at different institutions such as planning. So the approach doesn't really engage with that, because it kind of sticks to the contained market mechanism. The second, the new economics of prosperity, is mostly post-Keynesian thinking combined with ecological elements. And there's like macroeconomic modeling, a lot of modeling exercises that show very nicely that degrowth or zero growth or declining growth pathways are possible, but they still cling on to kind of macroeconomic variables that we deal with today. So it's about looking what happens to economic growth, but also to employment and investment patterns. And so it's really that way of modeling doesn't really allow to explore the qualitative changes into a different system, which is kind of the somewhat of a limit to these approaches in terms of engaging with planning. And then from a not microeconomic, but like a micro bottom-up perspective rather than a macroeconomics perspective, the anthropological critiques of economic growth focus on the necessity to build community ties, the destruction of social relations that come along with the growth paradigm, with the Western way of thinking in terms of progress. And so, but then this focus more on the local, on the community links, which is of course important, then still, when the focus is there, it's kind of somewhat, not conducive to exploring macroeconomic coordination questions. And we say that this is important just because we cannot ignore that right now the world economy is interconnected, is interlinked, and there might be negative repercussions of changes here and there, and so this is kind of making still creating the importance with engaging in the macroeconomic coordination question. We then were looking for, so after that kind of critique of our own field, we were then looking at different concepts that capture kind of that challenge of bringing together the social need satisfaction, ecological limits. And yeah, some of you might know the donut economy proposed by Kate Raworth, which brings this nicely together, like depicting the ecological ceiling, but also the social foundations, and creating, conceptualizing the safe and just space for humanity. And we say that, yeah, this is great, but actually what is missing here is kind of the filling of the donut, the political and economic institutions and processes that actually allow for this mediation between these different spheres. And so, yeah, and so what we say is actually we need to plan the donut. We propose to focus on 4 elements, 5 actually. So one is the setting of priorities and setting limits. I go into the details of these points in a second. The necessity to ensure democratic participation, dealing with social and macro-financial disruptions, the organization and fair sharing of meaningful and necessary work, and the mastering of and purposeful development of productive forces. And so what we say in terms of how can we define planning beyond growth, it's this set of institutions that supports decision-making processes informed by biophysical and social indicators and driven by deliberately stated social and ecological targets, what we have seen before as the inner and the outer space of the donut. And so here we think it's really in terms of like achieving and conceptualizing these different elements of what degrowth aims at. We think it can actually, the planning lens is important to bring in, and also to think of, if we want to have a fair distribution of work, if we want to have limits and priorities, these processes of negotiation, they must be planned and coordinated and organized and set up in a way that they actually live up to these goals. And so the first, I just take a sip of water. Yeah, so the first would be the setting and effectuating of limits and priorities. Here we say that, we don't question the scientific basis of the planetary boundaries or the universal, we draw on the universal base, the framework of universal basic needs that actually says, oh, there's certain needs that need to be satisfied for human beings to flourish. But what we say is that there's also a political element to it, in terms of, if we accept 1.5 degree or 2 degrees or 3 degrees of global warming, for example, it is a political choice. And so there need to be, in terms of when it is about setting the limits and also defining the priorities and the ways that needs are being satisfied, then we need processes to actually plan this. The second point would be to ensure democratic participation. Because we think our claim for economic democracy is not only like an ideal, just an ideal, but it's also that democratic participation is key to ring fence the legitimacy of these processes. And degrowth has in and of itself, this democratic expectation. And what needs to happen is really to integrate diverse positions through participation of different groups, interests. When we think about the economy, it can be different sectors, organizations, but also, different political, geographic scales, and knowledge need to be brought together. And so these institutions and processes must be designed exactly to ensure that democratic participation, but also with the aim of countering other inequalities and systems of oppression, to actually be designed to tackle racism, sexism, class inequities, and so on. And so here we need processes and institutions that are planned in that way. The third point is about, when it comes to the reorganization, social-ecological reorganization of the economy, it is also about work. It's not only about abstract sectors, but about first deciding what ecologically viable, socially desirable work is, what meaningful work is. And here the challenge is then to estimate the amount of work that would be required, the types of work that would be required, and also, to see how that matches people's interests and people's capabilities. Just because it's not like an idea to just say, okay, well, we need so and so many people in that area, and this is where they just go. But like, there need to be processes to actually deal with this, and especially also from a degrowth perspective, there is the vision to account for wage labor, but also to account more comprehensively for uncommodified work, important socially valuable work that is currently undertaken often by predominantly by women in household and community. And so, and to also account for this work, there need to be dedicated processes as well. The fourth point is about the purposeful development of productive forces. So technologies, organizations, ownership structures that are really in line with the social and ecological targets, rather than perpetuates economic growth and profit. And Andrea Vetter, for example, makes a proposal for a convivial technology, so a different way of evaluating technology, the usefulness and the desirability of technology. And so this can be one inspiration in terms of purposeful development and design in that realm. And the final point is the dealing with social and macrofinancial and other disruptions. Just because the speed and scale of the transformation that degrowth envisions carries a risk of ruptures, and many things might even be, we cannot even know everything that will happen. I mean, the same also applies not only to the purpose of, or in view of the purpose of transformation, but already with climate change, there is a lot of uncertainty. And so planning institutions could really be set up in a way to really anticipate as good as possible different ruptures. And then when it comes to, for example, potential unemployment, when we phase out fossil fuels, then there can be through the anticipation already a development of solutions to counter the potentially negative effects, and thereby counter full-blown socio-economic crisis. And I think this is really one important thing in terms of thinking what the planning process would look like, a planning process for degrowth and for just dealing with climate and ecological breakdown. It really needs to be a very highly adaptive process. And so, sorry, I heard someone. Okay. So this is kind of different ideas where we think like, oh, but this is kind of degrowth could be inspired from models of planning to design these processes to live up to these expectations. And so we didn't want to just stop there, but we thought it would still be nice to put something forward, which we call an agenda setting framework. Which is not thought as an ideal model, but just an inspiration to show, oh, this is how processes could look like. And there are several challenges that are actually still unresolved, especially when we, knowing that kind of the planning discussion and research and practice has not received major attention in the last decades. So we thought we put out a basis for discussion, and then also go into highlight 3 challenges, and I'll see if I'll go into the details of that if there's enough time left. But already I would like to put forward this this kind of graph, which shows in a way that principle of we've got the multiple different interests on the right bottom side, which can be city councils, enterprises, other communities at the local level, which would have to be, their pluralistic input would have to be brought together in a process of elaboration. And so this is one of the challenges that we see: elaboration, designing the processes of elaboration of a plan or plans. And we thought that this would be the first kind of step where these multiple views would be brought together, a plan be developed, and then there would be another body, the execution body or execution state, where the actual implementation of a certain plan would then be the specific instruments to carry out the plan would be chosen. And so then we'd have the elaboration, we have the execution, different instruments, and then these, the experimentation with the plan. So what has been decided in the elaborative and executive state would be fed back to the lower levels, and things that cannot be solved would go one level further up. And then we can think of this process in terms of multi-layered, multi-dimensional processes of planning, of experimentation and iteration. And so I'll go into some of these details of elaboration, execution, and multi-level dynamics, which we think are kind of in terms of thinking of the institutions, the challenges to be dealt with, but we also have some examples and inspiration to draw on. So when it comes to the multi-level dimensions, it's really the challenge of integrating these different levels. And when we think of a planetary crisis, then there must be an articulation of distinct levels, in principle from the global to the local level. And so one principle that we would put forward is the subsidiarity principle, so that everything that the most local entity could solve should be solved at that level, and everything, as I showed kind of using the graph, that cannot be solved at that level would have to be deliberated one level further up. And so in that sense,
Super quickly, Elena.
Yeah.
You said I should notify you when you're at 25 minutes.
Okay.
Just so to let you know. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And so in that sense, the process would have to be top down and bottom up. So bottom up nurturing the decisions, top down kind of the decisions that come out and feedback on the local level. Some theoretical proposals to design these multi-level processes would be that of multi-level democratic iteration put forward by Leibman, and then the participatory economy of Hanel. And we can, I'll be a bit quicker now. The question of elaboration I've already touched upon. It's bringing together pluralistic inputs, decide on a good combination between representation, participation of various actors, but also of the competencies that are required to take these decisions, and to ensure the democratic quality of the process, as I mentioned earlier. And then obviously a clear connection to the executive body, so that the plans that would have been elaborated are being fed to decide on the exact instruments. And here, to give some theoretical proposals or practical examples, the proposal for negotiated coordination is one way of bringing, it's more a theoretical model to bringing different heterogeneous agents together. Citizens' assemblies are one example, real-world example that we see in terms of climate, but also other processes that show how the democratic process could look like in that realm. I'll skip some of the examples. And so then in terms of the execution, the same, and then having talked about this interaction with the elaborative body, there needs to be accountability towards that body. And then actually the choice of which instruments lend themselves to the achievement of a certain goal. One point we would make is that it would need in-kind calculation apparatuses. I don't know who said it before, but maybe your work will become really relevant here. To really assess what carbon emissions could look like in terms of carbon quotas, for example, biodiversity targets, to really move away from that one monetary way of assessing processes. And then examples, in terms of when we think of current governments like credit policy, industrial policies, health planning effects, but then also at the, in terms of the actual production structures, we have now supply chain management tools where there is a direct feedback and that can help then the sourcing and distribution of products. And what it would also be important from the execution side is really to have oversight, to have oversight and ensure enforcement of the plans. And so moving away from the theoretical bit, I'll close with some connections to real world debates. Just because, yeah, it can be, it's an interesting academic or intellectual work to think about different structures of planning, but then also in terms of acting in the real world and making contributions to combating the social-ecological crisis, it's important to make these links. And so what we think is where entry points are current debates on industrial policy, but also on price controls that have started in the context, also of the war in Ukraine. And the related energy price shock. We see now currently in France an official endorsement of ecological planning from the government, but also from the new left coalition. And so there's kind of opening windows, opening possibilities to bring these topics in. At the same time, and this is two of the major challenges, is really the question of time. The question of, well, it's not a question, but the adverse distribution of power to any such undertaking, and then also to really build a majority support for such more democratic, more ecological, and more just ways of organizing economic activity. And that is it from my side.
Thanks a lot. I will now close the recording.